Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for coming. My name is Wang, and this is Paul Mones, and together with our firms together represent over 200 victims and survivors of the childhood sex abuse perpetrated in the offices of Rockefeller University by Rockefeller's own Reginald Archibald. For more than 40 years, Reginald Archibald, an alleged doctor, an alleged researcher working for the Rockefeller University Hospital, used his position to sexually abuse children as young as 2 years old, and up to and through their teens in his examining room at Rockefeller. On May 23rd, 2019, Rockefeller University, through its hired lawyers, largely admitted that this was true. But Rockefeller carefully hid key facts, as we will describe in detail today. Standing with us are about 20 or so of our incredibly brave clients. Paul and I are incredibly privileged, and our colleagues Alex and Alice and Eva are incredibly privileged to represent these individuals who had the courage to keep on trying to find out what happened and to stand here today, and some of them making statements and all of them standing to show the harm that Rockefeller has caused. Rockefeller issued Rockefeller issued its own version of a so-called report on Archibald's abuse. But through that May 23rd document, Rockefeller's own hired lawyer had no choice to admit that Reginald Archibald, a pediatric endocrinologist who worked at Rockefeller from the late 1940s and well into the 1980s, sexually abused children. You've heard this before, you know it. But the report carefully parsed facts and presented only half-truths. It did its best not to discuss the details of the actual abuse itself. And it hid the fact that based even on the numbers that are in that report, Reginald Archibald was one of the most, if not the most, prolific serial sexual abusers in the history of the United States. Archibald likely abused thousands of children, for nearly 4 decades at Rockefeller. The report stated that in response to Rockefeller's fall 2000 outreach to all Archibald patients who could be located, over 900 victims took the time and emotional energy to respond. So 900 people actually responded and called in. It carefully phrased its outreach as having been to, quote, over 1,000 individuals. That, we believe, was a very careful statement. We think it was much more than that. What it did not say is that the outreach was based in part on index cards of all the patients from Archibald's pediatric endocrinology clinic that he kept for himself and that his family turned over to Rockefeller's lawyers. Rockefeller did not report what its lawyers told one of our clients, that there were 9,000 such index cards. 9,000 index cards with 9,000 names of children who were treated at the pediatric endocrinology clinic, that Archibald chose to keep to himself those index cards in his home. The reality, one that Rockefeller seems unwilling to admit, is that Archibald sexually abused well in excess of 1,000 children during his many decades practicing at Rockefeller. That assertion is based on several critical facts in addition to the index cards. First, Archibald saw patients at Rockefeller University for nearly 40 years, during which it is almost certain that thousands of children crossed the threshold into his examination room. Second, Archibald also sexually abused an unknown but significant number of boys at Madison Square Boys Club, where he was essentially the physician in residence for many years. Third, Rockefeller has been unable to locate records for a number of our clients who were abused by Archibald, but acknowledges that the available medical records do not cover the entire period in which Archibald treated patients at Rockefeller. So more such patients seem to exist. Fourth, given the date of the abuse, the dates of the abuse, and the ages of many children, it's reasonable to conclude that many have passed away, many have long moved far outside of New York City and are no longer traceable, and many more have suffered ruined lives from the abuse and cannot confront or even discuss the abuse with anyone at all. So just take a minute and think, if 900 people had the courage to actually make the call, and if they're saying that they sent out more than 1,000, which could be, we don't know, could be 2,000, 3,000, we don't know what it is, think about what actually is likely, how many thousands. Rockefeller and its lawyers do not say anywhere in their report what they reasonably estimate the accurate number of victims to be, given all of these very basic facts.
Yeah, and just to put the facts in context, we read a lot about Larry Nasser, who was a doctor for the USA Gymnastics team. He molested, according to news reports, allegedly about 500 victims. In terms of just doctors who molested patients, we also have recent news at Ohio State, Dr. Richard Strauss, who molested about 200 patients, all over 18. These numbers of Dr. Archibald, or Mr. Archibald, as we prefer to call him, because the name doctor really doesn't suit him, have pale in comparison to these others. While Rockefeller, the report that was issued, also sanitizes and sugarcoats the reality of what Dr. Archibald did to our clients, is a cynical sugarcoating of what he really did. The report also lauds Dr. Archibald for his supposed great research efforts. However, the reality is this is what he did to people, and we want to call it as it was. He fondled and rubbed naked children as he held them on his lap, forced them on his lap. He forced naked children to lay on an examination table and ordered them to rub or masturbate themselves. He masturbated and forced these young boys to ejaculate into test tubes or cups, and he watched as naked children stood against a wall and forced them to pose in various positions that included, with both boys and girls, close-up photos of their genitals. As part of the report's apparent efforts to downplay Archibald's decades of abuse of Rockefeller patients, it simply refuses to describe and therefore ignores the complete understanding of what happened to its victims. Many of these victims, as my colleague Marion has pointed out, were as young as 2 years old to 5 years old. And because he saw patients over years, that he demanded to see them in a year in and year out basis, he basically groomed these children to expect being abused when they went into his so-called examination room. And the terrible outcome of this abuse is the legacy that our clients have had to live with their whole lives. One of those is that he, unlike many, many, many other abusers, he abused siblings. We have a number of our clients whose siblings were abused, younger siblings were abused, who live with the guilt that they didn't say anything earlier on in their lives to prevent this abuse. These children were unusually vulnerable because many of them also suffered from being nervous going into his room. They were brought there because many of them were allegedly short of stature and they were looking for help. And
some of our clients had developmental or mental disabilities. A number of them came from very disadvantaged economic backgrounds. He targeted the most vulnerable children and their families, and he targeted people who were coming in concerned and worried and trying to get help. In our view, really, that his office was not a place of research or treatment. It was a place for a pedophile to explore his own sexual gratification. Even Rockefeller had to admit in its limited report that it had knowledge of Archibald's wrongdoing for years during the decades that he had access to children. Rockefeller knew in 1960 that the New York County District Attorney's Office issued a grand jury subpoena for the medical records of 2 Archibald patients. Rockefeller knew. But Rockefeller chose to do nothing to protect the thousands of children who entered Archibald's examination room after that criminal investigation. The fact that the grand jury did not indict Archibald was not an excuse for not intervening. Tragically, about 180 of our 200 clients were abused by Archibald after Rockefeller had notice of a criminal investigation into Archibald's practice, and approximately 25% of our clients were born after the grand jury was impaneled. Had Rockefeller not sat on its hands after learning about the grand jury investigation, these many victims would not have been abused. Rockefeller appears to obscure the full picture of its notice. In its first public statement in the fall of 2018, Rockefeller unmistakably implied that it had become aware of Archibald's misconduct only in 2004, and at that time had hired the same law firm that just recently issued a report to do a so-called investigation in 2004. According to Rockefeller's own lawyer's report, that statement that they only learned in 2004, that implication is just plainly not true. The more recent report revealed that a, quote, former physician-in-chief, so in other words, the lead doctor at Rockefeller, who for nearly a decade and a half, from 1960 to 1974, and whose name is carefully not mentioned in the report, said, quote, he had received several complaints during the tenure from patients, family members, or staff about Archibald's examination of patients' genitals. So the head physician-in-chief at Rockefeller had several complaints about how Archibald examined patients' genitals. Under New York law, the physician-in-chief's knowledge is imputed directly to Rockefeller itself. In 1996, Rockefeller received a complaint from a former patient. And as I'm going to go through a few points now, and we will turn soon to our clients, I want to recognize that it is some of the people standing here in front of you who insisted on calling back and asking over and over again questions. And it is only because they asked the questions that Rockefeller finally had no choice but to admit it. In 1996, they received a complaint from a former client, Archibald, a former patient. In 1998, there was a patient who complained to the New York State Office of Professional Medical Conduct. In 2004, Rockefeller received yet another complaint. Rockefeller knew. Over and over and over again, Rockefeller was told, but it kept a pedophile in the midst of its building, supporting him and paying him to sexually abuse children. The magnitude of the number of Archibald victims demands a more thorough accounting than is reflected in the limited and defensive 27-page report issued by Rockefeller's lawyers. Lawyers who told one victim that they, the lawyers, had been paid millions of dollars to conduct an investigation. The report is woefully inadequate and in fact tries to assert legitimate rationales for some of Archibald's behavior and for Rockefeller's inaction over several decades. This matter demands accountability. Rockefeller must immediately state how many victims it realistically and reasonably believes Archibald actually abused. The New York County District Attorney, the New York State Attorney General's Office, and the New York State Office of Professional Medical Conduct should open and/or disclose the findings of their investigations into Rockefeller's response to Archibald's crimes and transgressions. Archibald's former patients and the public deserve to know more than what Rockefeller and its law firm have chosen to share. We've written today to the District Attorney and the Office of Professional Medical Conduct on behalf of our clients to demand action which is critical to a full accounting of Rockefeller's awareness of Archibald's abuse of hundreds and likely thousands of vulnerable and innocent children from the age of 2 to the late teens. We've also written to Rockefeller's lawyers demanding, once again, we've asked before and they haven't bothered answering, that they disclose further information and that they release relevant materials in their possession about our own clients. Rockefeller had a sexual predator of children for more than 40 years in their main building. They have a beautiful campus of many acres in the middle of our Manhattan, in the middle of the city. It's time to stop hiding behind its lawyers, carefully refusing to tell us what they know. We demand answers, our clients demand answers, and everybody in this room should demand those answers. Thank you for listening, and now we're going to have our clients speaking, and let's do this, right? Sorry. We're going to start to our right with Matt Harris.
Can whoever's speaking sit in front of the microphone or slide?
Oh, yeah, we can move over. Okay. This is Matthew Harris.
Why should we care? I've been thinking about that question a lot lately. I thought about going by Rockefeller University Hospital this morning to remind myself why. Then I remembered the last time I stood outside, a year ago, staring out at those massive iron gates. That morning, my wife-to-be was having surgery nearby at Memorial Sloan Kettering. I hadn't realized where I was until those iron gates brought me back. I found myself overcome by an unexplainable rage to storm inside. I wanted to scream at someone, anyone, "What are you doing here? Don't you know what happened behind those gates?" I stood frozen, unable to move, imagining the countless children that were driven through those gates before me. I thought about the first time they were led into Dr. Archibald's office and he asked them to undress. I wondered if they felt like I did when he photographed them naked, or when he touched them trying to arouse them, or asked them to demonstrate how they touched themselves. I do a lot of wondering in the middle of the night. Dr. Archibald is dead. This happened so long ago. Why should we care? Most people stand outside those massive gates. They see a world-renowned institution with a legacy of groundbreaking medical research, shelves of Nobel Prizes to prove it. I see a house of unspeakable horrors. I hear the cries of countless children begging their mothers and fathers not to leave them alone inside. I smell the stench of an elite institution that cared more for its own reputation than the children in its care. I pray that those of us who are harmed are granted justice, and the atrocities that Rockefeller University ignored for more than 60 years, that they continue to perpetuate by their self-serving disregard, are known by all, and that all of us care, so we never again protect the reputation of an institution by turning our backs on sexually abused kids.
Thank you, Matt. Vincent?
I'm Vincent Gazzone. There's nothing succinct about describing how deeply Dr. Archibald's abuse and Rockefeller University's blind eye have impacted my life. I relived the feelings of being molested weekly. It happened the other night when a drunken woman from work hugged and latched onto me as she carried on an incomprehensible monologue. Most people would simply remove themselves, but I could not. I felt helpless and paralyzed, just like I felt when I was an 11-year-old boy. I was unable to extricate myself, just as I was unable to get away from Dr. Archibald as he molested me. I couldn't cry for help, and there was no parent to rescue me. My parents were not allowed in the room, and that seemed acceptable because they trusted Rockefeller. Clearly, Rockefeller did not deserve that trust, and I've been paying for that my entire life. In my work as a police officer and then firefighter for the FDNY, I've seen and experienced the unthinkable, including as a first responder on 9/11. But nothing I've witnessed in my work has compared to being abused by Dr. Archibald and the pain it has caused me throughout my life.
Hi, my name is Helene Hamilton. I was 13 years old when I went to see Dr. Archibald. My mother was concerned with the fact that I was not very tall and not maturing physically. While in the examining room with Dr. Archibald, he proceeded to conduct a so-called physical examination on me. He touched me inappropriately, rubbed against me, and violated me. He then took a nude photograph of me. No one was in the room but us. In Rockefeller's lawyer report, there was hardly any mention of girls who were also patients of Dr. Archibald. They were sexually abused. I was one of those unfortunate girls, and it is important to remember that we were victims too.
My name is Gary Manfrey, and I am a victim of Archibald and Rockefeller. And no one should call him doctor. All of his credentials should be removed as if they never existed. I am here to discuss mental illness. This past year has been unbelievably painful, reliving my story over and over again. This has been devastating for me. The pain has been so great that it has led to a lack of sleep. That lack of sleep has led to severe emotional and psychological distress. The tension I feel every day has affected the quality of my work and my relationships. My medical records clearly state that I was doing okay in school. Then, after I hit puberty, I am failing school, fighting, getting suspended, and using drugs. By the time I am age 15 years old, I am being taken to a psychiatrist. Now I understand why. This abuse changed the course of my life forever. If anyone out there is hurting on the inside because of sexual abuse, reach out to someone for help. Do not hurt yourself no matter what. You are not alone, and someone will understand what you are going through. You are not a victim, but you are a survivor.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Samuel Deutscher, and I'm here today as one of the many victims of child sexual abuse at the hands of Reginald Archibald and the Rockefeller University. Terrible abuse that I suffered with Archibald damaged every aspect of my life. 2 failed marriages, my work, my health, and often my efforts at happiness. While Rockefeller University cannot give me a do-over for 46 years of pain and suffering, or make the truth palatable. It can at least bring the truth to light. I am here to demand accountability and justice. I stand proudly with the victims who have a voice and those who remain voiceless.
Hi, my name is Jonathan Chink, and I've waited a long time to tell this story. 47 years ago, my loving parents, in a state of concern over my growth, turned to doctor, but I won't call him a doctor because they're concerned for your health and welfare, so I'll say Reginald Archibald, for help. For 3 years, I saw Reginald Archibald, a pedophile, masquerading as a researcher of child growth and development. As my parents delivered me into his lair, behind a closed door with nobody present, he used his bogus medical explanations to do unspeakable things to my then 10-year-old self. With each disgusting act perpetrated on me as a child, he chiseled away at the foundation of my innocence, leaving me ashamed, confused, upset, and knowing things I was not yet ready to know or able to process. All this while the administration of Rockefeller stood silent and remained inactive. I have never been able to get far away from the creepy doctor, as I used to call him as a child, as I referred to him. However, today I stand no longer ashamed, shedding the stigma and firmly accepting the moniker of survivor and also victim of childhood sexual abuse. I shudder when I recall how Dr. Archibald held my naked body between his legs, fondling my genitals and asking me questions about my life and my education like a concerned and caring friend. I shudder when I think of the frustration he expressed when I could not perform as he wanted me to and directed me to. I have had to fight for 40 years, 7 years, to keep this trauma at bay. And I will continue to fight in my new skin, victim of childhood sexual abuse, until I feel that Rockefeller owns their actions and the consequences of them. Reginald Archibald may have taken my innocence from me, but he will never take my ability to cope, to overcome, and to fight for what is right. Thanks.
Thank you very much. We'll answer questions. I just want to remark again how enormously privileged we are to represent these individuals and to restate that Rockefeller never would have ever said anything about this, never issued a report if it weren't the survivors themselves who kept calling and kept asking and kept demanding and kept questioning. People called and said, "Can I have my medical records? Because something was strange about that and I don't understand." Over and over again, people asked, and Rockefeller did nothing until it just felt it had no choice, and then it issued a report that we think still hid crucial facts, like the 9,000 index cards. And the one other thing I want to just say, to echo one of our clients said, is that now we have as lawyers heard and talked to more than 200 individuals about what they experienced, and over again the story and speaking to their relatives and people in their lives is very similar, which is that there was a child who went into the room who was kind of happy and pretty normal, had played in the streets without worrying, played stickball, and seemed like a popular kid or seemed comfortable in their skin. And then oddly something happened and nobody really knew what happened, but they came out kind of sadder and didn't really want to be with other kids or people, and just quieter and just broken. And that is a refrain we hear over and over again. This kind of abuse remains hidden because these wonderful people have tried to survive, and they walk along the streets and you pass them and you think they're just walking along and getting along, but they carry with them enormous pain and suffering, and it altered all of their lives. So thank you again for coming, and thank you all for standing with us, and we can answer some questions now.
Mara Silvers with WNYC Optimist. Can you go into more detail about the index cards and why those were in the possession of his family and not the hospital, and how they're different from the hospital's like medical records and other records?
That's an excellent question. She just asked about the index cards and why he had them and the family had them and they weren't part of the medical records. That's a wonderful question for Rockefeller. So we don't know that much about these index cards. We have seen some of them for our clients. One of our clients was told by Rockefeller's lawyers with a Rockefeller executive sitting in the room that they had been given 9,000 index cards. We know that they still, even in that context, they said, well, those are 9,000 cards for the endocrinology clinic, and so we don't know if all of them are Rockefeller's particular patients. But that said, why is Reginald Archibald taking these cards home and keeping them carefully in his why are they not with the records? There are also, there's so much we don't know. What we have seen on those index cards are some markings and code. We do not know what those codes are. Perhaps they are related to actual examinations, perhaps they're more sinister. But these are questions for Rockefeller, and Rockefeller doesn't mention 9,000 index cards in their report. Why did he have these index cards? Why did he keep boxes? Apparently, I believe, and you can ask them this, they also told one of our clients that the family at some point carted out a few boxes of materials for Debevoise. So what else was in those boxes? Why is he holding on to them? And of course, the question that many people have asked in the past, and which we ask again, is where are the photos? What happened to them? And as Paul Mones said, every one of our clients was photographed naked. Every one of our clients pretty consistently can remember being naked from the minute they're in to the minute they leave, which is completely against medical practice even back then, that you have a naked child alone with you for 40 minutes. And the photographs are close-ups of genitalia, close-ups of female and male genitalia, children. It sounds too generic to me to say it, but children's genitalia, and it's on the table. People are made to spread their legs, close-ups, all of that. Where are the photos? Rockefeller has told us that they have not really found any. They don't know where they are, but we want to know.
The state health department has said that they don't release the results of any investigations into physicians unless those investigations are conclusive. And in this situation, is there any precedent for a doctor who has died, any investigation into them being open to the public after their death?
I don't know the answer to that immediately, but I do know there are many ways of dealing with it, as you just said. First of all, he is dead. Secondly, you can redact certain things, right? And to the extent that they have anything in their files that they can release or generically describe, I don't see why that would necessarily be a problem. I don't know the ins and outs of why they're saying they can't, but it would seem to me that given the magnitude of this abuse, there is a public interest and really a requirement to disclose what they do know or what they do have in their files.
Excuse me if you already mentioned this, but can you talk about what legal action you've taken or plan to take against the school?
So we, as many of you probably already know, the passage of the Child Victims Act in New York State allows us now finally to actually take action on behalf of our survivors. For so many years, New York we were not able to do that. We will be filing many lawsuits. I believe this will probably be one of the biggest actions in the country, frankly. It's not just our clients, which are over 200. We have learned and are aware of at least another 200, 250 other clients represented by other lawyers, which means you have, maybe certainly more than 400 and possibly more than 500 individuals. And just be aware again, like really think about what that means. A lot of people don't wanna file a lawsuit, a lot of people don't wanna come forward and talk about it. A lot of us have things that we've dealt with in our lives we'd rather not think about, and many people who suffer very serious traumas as children don't want to do that. So to say that 500 people, or almost 500 people, between 400 and 500 people are willing to find lawyers and file lawsuits, what does that mean for how many children were hurt by this, and how many people are out there? Again, we have the 9,000 index cards, we have the statement, more than 1,000 outreach, we have 900 people calling, Rockefeller's lawyers. I think it's very reasonable to conclude that it's multiple thousands, but Rockefeller should tell us. Rockefeller knows. They know better than anyone. Yeah, I'll be behind.
Sorry. In the email that you sent us, you talked about the newly discovered facts. Could you, beyond the index card, could you give us a little more?
Well, there is the fact of the index card, there is the fact of our client's experience, there is the fact of what they hid behind in terms of their own report sort of quietly sort of hides what the details of the actual abuse that he was doing was, calling it physical manipulation as opposed to what he was actually doing. All of those things, and then the fact of that we have clients who were spending more than 800 hours naked as children in his office, while nurses and other doctors were walking around. Even the fact that he had a child for so long in the office, even that was unusual. Many of our clients have said, when I look back on it now, I went to several doctors for this issue, and when I compare how the other doctor, who was also trying to address my stature, treated me, my parent was in the room with me, it took maybe 5-10 minutes, and maybe only 2 or 3 minutes disrobed. So 45 minutes with a child by himself behind a closed door, and some of our clients talked about it, how a nurse would walk in, so somebody knew that these children were naked in there for that amount of time. Yes?
Just as a quick follow-up, have you heard anything about those nurses or doctors or anything?
Another great question for Rockefeller. They quietly sort of mention that they have tried to speak to some of those people. They have interview notes, but they don't say specifically what those people said. With a few exceptions, but mostly we don't know. Rockefeller knows. Yes.
August 14th is the deadline for Child Victims Act to begin filing cases. Are you interested in filing any pre-action discovery for documents and files that you're concerned concerned about their upkeep and
right?
About their
We are exploring that. We have sent preservation notices. And we're exploring that, and we're also exploring other methods of obtaining the information. And of course, once we file the action, we will be able to receive it in the course of that action. We mentioned in the letter to the DA, the New York County District Attorney, and we have copies of it, that although there are very strict rules around disclosing grand jury records, the DA himself can file an action, and there is very good case law to support when, particularly here where the individual being investigated is dead, and there's an enormous public interest in finding out what happened, that the district attorney himself can ask for that, and we've asked him to do that, and he should.
Sorry.
Yeah.
The DA's office said that they don't have any files on this subject matter in their office. What's your response?
Well,
to
that doesn't necessarily mean that there aren't grand jury minutes, which perhaps one of my colleagues knows better than I do. I don't think the fact that they don't have it in their office necessarily means that it doesn't exist. Yeah,
Could you tell us a little bit about the photographs of, are these photos of the younger you at a time when you visited?
that's exactly right. The individuals are holding photographs of themselves at the age when they visited Archibald. And we mentioned to one of you that we will do a group photo outside, so you can take a better picture of everybody. If there's no other questions, we'll conclude, and thank you again for coming.